Welcome to the 5 o'clock show. It's time for Common Sense. Now, it's Katz and Cosby with John Catsimatidis and Rita Cosby, standing for truth, justice, and the American way, bringing common sense to the world. Now, here's John Catsimatidis and Rita Cosby. Breaking news, WABC.
Wow, on Katz and Cosby, some big news. The question is this the October surprise? John and also Rudy Washington and Judge Weinberg, a bombshell special counsel filing just released. This is on the January 6th case. And Judge Weinberg, what does it say?
Fundamentally, there's an issue about whether President Trump was entitled to immunity because the allegations against him in the indictment were during the course and furtherance of his official duties. What Jack Smith, the special prosecutor, is trying to say is there were private acts. This is a submission by Smith to the court saying a lot of these acts were personal acts, they were private acts, had nothing to do with official conduct. So it has to do with the immunity claim by Trump.
And let's get to the politics of this, because here it is coming out. My God.
Let's be clear about the politics. This is a case that doesn't need to be tried now. Let's repeat that. This is a case that does not need to be tried now. It could be tried after the election. This is a submission on the immunity issue that does not have to be litigated now. It can be litigated after the election. What Chutkan, the judge in this case, a Democratic appointee.
Who, by the way, works at the same firm where Hunter Biden worked in D.C.
A Democratic appointee for the bench who's made every ruling possible to favor Jack Smith and his prosecution against Trump, allowed this to happen. And Smith has made these allegations. Remember this, Rita and John and Rudy. These are merely allegations. These are assertions. These are not established facts. This is not established evidence. This is the October surprise, and this is disgusting. And as Rita, as you pointed out before we went into the studio today, isn't it a coincidence? At the debate last night, the last question posed to Senator Vance was about January 6th. How did they know, or did they know, that this was coming out today?
Yeah, that's the point. I mean, John, there have been leaks all over the place on this January 6th stuff, left and right. And the last question in the debate last night was to J.D. Vance, will you denounce, what Trump did? Do you denounce and agree that Trump lost the election in 2020? They kept hammering and hammering. And I kept saying, why are they so focused on January 6th as the last question of the vice presidential debate of all the debates this election season? Leak.
Remember Godfather 1, do you renounce Satan?
Yes. That was essentially what they said.
Rita, I didn't get into late last night, so I saw the last half. Did they talk about Ukraine and Russia?
No. Did they talk about crime?
Did they talk about energy?
Did they talk about crime? No.
And here we are, we're talking about where you're going to build a house.
Yes, I know. On the federal land. By the way, and how about the fact that last night, and John and I were live afterwards covering all the, wall-to-wall post reaction and everything. Afterwards, I was like, wait a minute, you didn't bring up to Tim Walz all these contradictions. They brought up the one about Tiananmen Square. What about the stolen valor? What about him letting Minneapolis burn? What about the fact his wife was romanticizing? What about the way he trashed the National Guard, of which he's a member of? That's the fact that they didn't even get into that, or Russia, Ukraine.
What about his war record? He said he was a military commander, and he had resigned before his guys went overseas.
Right, but it was January 6th. At the end, I was like, why are they so focused as the last question? And now today, here suddenly, surprise, surprise, a leak on... and they kept trying to put Vance in a box last night, which says a lot about the moderators.
Rita, that's all they have. That's all they have.
Yeah.
And it's contrived. It's made up. And everybody in all the networks, I'm still trying to figure out who's issuing the orders. I mean, 1 week, she has lower numbers than Biden in the polls. She's the worst VP ever. That's what every network was saying. And then the very next week, she's Joan of Arc. She's Margaret Thatcher.
Right.
How does that happen? So now all they have is January 6th. There's nothing else.
And by the way, a big development also on the Eric Adams case, Judge, too, because today he was in court and they're saying that there is more charges to come.
More rumors to the effect that there's going to be a superseding indictment with more charges against Adams and more named co-conspirators, whether they're indicted co-conspirators or unindicted co-conspirators, but there are other people who are going to be named in future superseding indictment. And by the way, based on my reading, Mayor Adams is saying, give me a trial now so I can clean my name.
And I can be on the ballot.
And I can be on the ballot and run for re-election.
Yeah, which is only...
How about fair?
Yeah, fair.
How about fair?
Yeah, and it's interesting. By the way, he also now added to his team an attorney who was appointed by President Trump in the U.S. Attorney's Office years ago, has sort of some Trump ties, which is interesting. He's saying, wait a minute, I'm a victim of politics, a little bit like Trump.
Talking about interesting gambits and coincidences, Rita, you have the same fundraiser involved with Jumaane Williams, who would be the acting mayor. What's that about?
Yeah, it's not looking good for Jumaane Williams. One of the fundraisers listed in the indictment against Adams has a tie to Jumaane Williams, who's to the left of the left. God help us, Rudy Washington, if Jumaane Williams is our next number two, at least even temporarily in line and elevated to number one.
That, you have a lunatic city council. They could do a lot of damage in 60 days.
And imagine if you have a lunatic temporary mayor. Think about the damage.
Sign a lot of bad legislation.
A
lot of legislation to be signed. Right?
Well, joining us.
That can't be undone.
Yeah.
Thank you, Rudy. Absolutely correct.
Great point, Rudy. Great point. And joining us now, you guys, here on Katz and Cosby, we have the former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich. Newt, it's great to have you here. Your reaction, first of all, to the debate.
Well, before that, I just have to say, when I saw that Cuomo is considering running for mayor, it just gave me a whole sense of how deep the ethics problems in New York State are. If you think that, given Cuomo's background, that's going to clean up the mayor's office, I mean, it's an astonishing process. Look, I think the debate was pretty clear. Frank Luntz had a focus group, and of 12 people, 10 thought that J.D. Vance had won, and of the 10, 7 had switched to be. These were all undecided. 7 had switched to be for Trump by the end of the debate. Now that to me is a pretty good indicator. And I just did a podcast that we're going to release in a day or two at Newt's World with the former Republican Senate leader in Minnesota, who just wrote a book on Tim Walz, and from having personally served with him for years, knows him and all that, and I mean, Walz is in so far over his head that it's really the idea that he could end up being president should scare everybody, but then of course the idea that Kamala could end up being president should scare everybody. I mean, surely we should know by now, between the Middle East, Ukraine, Taiwan, the drug problems and the open border, the fact that we've had 15,000 murderers and 25,000 sex offenders and about 600,000 criminals cross the border illegally. I mean, somewhere in there, people have to say, these guys just can't do it. I mean, they're not competent. And you're going to see that in North Carolina when they cannot get the things that they should get as rapidly as they should get them. They're already about 4 days or 5 days behind where they should be in getting help to the people in the mountains. And it's just because they can't run a system.
I mean, and nothing's going to change if Kamala Harris gets elected. I mean, is the border going to change? No. Is the fentanyl coming through the borders? No. Is the migrants coming through? No. I mean, it's just, don't people realize it when they're saying they're going to vote for Kamala Harris?
Look, my hunch is that if Kamala Harris wins, everything will get worse, not better. It's not that it won't change. The border will be more open. The drugs will be coming in more. Our position in foreign policy will be more dangerous. And people need to understand, we could slide into a really big war if we're not careful. I mean, when you have conflict with Russia, you have conflict with Iran, you have the Chinese watching, looking how weak Biden and Harris are, and considering taking over Taiwan, which produces about 70% of the world's computer chips. And then, of course, you got North Korea, which is a wild card in and of itself, with a whole lot of nuclear weapons and a dictatorship that none of us understand. It may not, frankly, be understandable. This is a dangerous world that needs a very calm, very steady, mature person dealing with it. And
we got war skirmishes. We have war skirmishes all over the place. We have 400 ships between China and Russia. We're circling, not circling, but off the coast of Alaska. 400 ships.
Well, look, I think what you have really for the first time since World War II is you have a real alliance. It's an alliance of dictators. Right now it's basically Russia, China, North Korea, Iran are the key players, and they are consistently opposed to the United States, and they want to find a way to beat us if they can. And it's the most dangerous the world's been since about 1938, when we were sliding into World War II. And I think people need to understand we don't get strong leadership, and we don't rebuild the economy, and we don't rebuild our military. We're going to be in enormous trouble in the next 3 or 4 years.
You know, Newt Gingrich, too, sorry, as we were just talking about this alliance, you brought up China and North Korea. What did you make of the fact last night, and we were just talking with Rudy and the judge and John here, about the question was posed to Tim Walz, but it was more on the misspeaking element. But the fact remains he was there up to reports up to 30 times in China, and he seems to be an appeaser of China. He continues to be an appeaser of China. It wasn't really hit on, obviously, by the moderators in that forum last night. But your thoughts of what a concern that is, given what you just were talking about?
Well, look, I think you have to start with the idea that Walz is probably to the left of Bernie Sanders. So Walz wants to, he wants to appeal to everybody. He was very worried last night that we might use language about illegal immigrants that was too strong. He's very worried about having a relationship with Xi Jinping and making sure that the Chinese communists know that we like them. He's very concerned that the Israelis not be too aggressive in dealing with Iran. I mean, every time you turn around, you're going to find that Walz is a classic left-winger who wants to apologize for America. He wants to appease our enemies, and he hopes everybody can make nice. I always tell people, these kind of left-wingers saw The Lion King and thought it was a documentary, and they actually believe lions and zebras sing and dance together. And when we try to convince them the world's dangerous and lions eat zebras, they go, no, didn't you see the movie? What's wrong with you? So they really wanted, the Israelis to put up with Hamas, put up with Hezbollah, put up with the Houthis, put up with Iran. And they have no notion of how to deal with somebody who's as much of a thug as Putin is. And that's where having Donald Trump, who's very tough, as you guys know, because you know him.
Yep.
I mean, Trump is quite capable of standing up to anybody on the planet. And I think that we would be dramatically safer almost overnight if he won the election.
Absolutely. I 100% agree. We need strength right now. Everybody, we're talking to the former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich. Rudy, Washington, go ahead real quick.
Newt, I was just going to say, we're at war already and people don't even realize it. They've killed a couple of 100,000 of our young people with fentanyl without firing a bullet. Harris and Biden, Harris and Walz believe in legalizing all drugs, all illicit drugs. I mean, I just can't imagine it.
Well, I think you're right. And when you realize that every year we lose twice as many people to fentanyl as we lost in the 8 years of the Vietnam War. Every year we lose twice as many people as we lost. And, I think a serious regime would say to the Chinese, if you don't stop producing all the materials, we will have 100% tariff on everything. Your economy will collapse, and we're going to cut off everything. And I'd say the same thing to the Mexicans. Mexico right now is a narco state. The cartels have enormous power. The Mexican government is afraid to take them on. And I think we have to be very tough and very direct. And we have to be prepared to recognize that the cartels kill more Americans than any terrorist group in the world. And we need to deal with them accordingly.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Newt Gingrich, we love you. Thank you for being with us, Newt. Always give our best to Callista, too, please.
We'll do it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And joining us now here on Katz and Cosby, we have the former Deputy National Security Advisor under President Trump, KT McFarland. KT, my jaw dropped today when I heard President Biden. We've talked about sort of his weak leadership. He was asked about Iran, which has showered Israel with ballistic missiles, close to 200 of them in the last 24 hours. And what does our president say? Iran is, quote, way off. That's a direct quote. Way off. I'd say way off course is how he said it. That is disgraceful. What a wimp we have in the White House.
Well, the only thing off course was those missiles themselves. They didn't hit anything, or hit very little. And so in a funny way, I guess he's probably saying the truth in his own mind. Look, here's the upside of all of this. Because of the weakness of the Biden administration, because of the Biden-Harris refusal to support Israel, slow-walking delivery of weapon systems so essential to Israel's self-defense, what did Israel do? They had no choice. They did it alone. So the cyber attack that they conducted, they didn't need permission from Joe Biden or Kamala Harris or anybody. They just did it. And they did it brilliantly, strategically, and it has served to wipe out all the senior leadership of Hezbollah, take out half of their missile launchers. And in addition to that, they're now going to, they've now got Hezbollah so back on their hind legs that Israel's going to go in and finish the job. They've already more or less finished the job with Hamas. Now they're going to do Hezbollah.
Which, by the way, Katie, which is why the U.S. should be applauding. I mean, they are not only, they should be saying, what else do you need? Finish the job, not just for Israel, but for the world, for Western civilization. Do us, everybody, a favor.
You're so right, Rita. We should be thanking Israel for doing what nobody else had the nerve to do. And I think what's fascinating is that, so Iran launches this big, missile barrage. Israel responds. Mostly Israel defends itself, but then Israel has responded. And Iran has come back and said, well, we're done now. We're done. We've retaliated. So what that tells me is that the mullahs and the Iranian leadership, they're nervous that they're next. They've got to worry that all the assassinations, all of the targeting of the senior leadership of Hezbollah and Hamas, that, the Mossad probably has their addresses, too.
Yeah, by the way, John has a great phrase. John, what is it? Like, watch when he goes to the bathroom that he doesn't have a firecracker show up or a pager goes off,
Absolutely. I think he's gone into special hiding where they have special bathrooms.
Yeah, exactly.
They're called from the palace to the outhouse.
We really are so sad about it. You can hear that, Katie. John and I are so sad. Judge Weinberg?
Casey, good to talk to you again. So if you were the insider at the White House and giving advice, what would you say the Israelis should do next?
Finish the job.
Okay, what is that? But more specifically.
Here's what. So if Iran looks like it's going to do anything in response and retaliate, if the next step, the next hair on the head of an Israeli that is harmed, then I think Israel goes and could do several things. It could take out some of the oil fields, could have the economic weapon. So deprive Iran of its essential revenues from their oil sales. So take out the oil weapon, take out those oil fields. And if Iran is pushing, if Iran wants a larger regional war, bomb the nuclear sites. For years, Israel has been kept at bay because Iran's threat was always, well, if you come after us, if you attack our nuclear sites, we're going to really obliterate you with Hezbollah and Hamas. Well, Hezbollah and Hamas are no longer. And so now the threat that Iran has always wanted, that threat's gone now. I mean, how does Iran defend itself if Israel decides to take it further? All of a sudden, Israel has established a great deterrent against Iran. Iran's already sent some of their weapons to Ukraine. They're showing that a lot of their weapons don't work. And they're also showing how penetrated their security services are. I mean, Judge, it's to the point where the Iranians set up an anti-Mossad unit to investigate and look for Mossad agents in Iran. And it turns out that the guy who headed the unit was, in fact, a Mossad agent. So
that is amazing. By the way, did you also see, KT, that President Biden came out today and he was asked, should the nuclear sites be hit? And he said, no, absolutely not. And also the UN Secretary General today, as we're talking about disgrace, he came out and said, there's really been huge violations of international law. And he cited Hezbollah, and the next word was IDF. He puts the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, in the same place as Hezbollah.
this should be evidence to the next administration, hopefully, to the Trump administration, to say, okay, we want a different deal at the UN. We pay for everything at the UN. Our dues, our mandatory dues, are really high, much higher than anybody else's. So we're paying for everything. What if we just don't pay those dues? We have the option of not paying those dues, and then we would selectively pay for the parts of the UN which we think are good and decent and right, and we would earmark those. You know what the only punishment we have if we decide not to pay our dues? We don't get to vote in the General Assembly. Our vote means nothing in the General Assembly.
Big loss.
Yeah. So we still have our seat on the Security Council. We still control, and if we did that, or even the threat of doing that to the United Nations, I think would pull the United Nations up really fast.
Well, thank you. Thank you, KT.
Yeah, KT, thank you so much. Good points. And listen, Trump had talked about that too, saying that would be a blessing if that happens. Thanks, KT. Great to have you here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And you guys, we have a quick break. And after the break, we have Congresswoman Erin Houchin, who is talking about how maybe funds should be pulled out of sanctuary cities. That and a lot more.
A common sense recap of the day's biggest stories. It's John Catsimatidis and Rita Cosby. Cats and Cosby on 77 WABC.
And we are back here on Cats and Cosby. And of course, immigration was one of the issues last night. We definitely heard that during the debate. And joining us now is Congresswoman Erin Houchin from the great state of Indiana. And Congresswoman, let's get to it because I know you've been a big supporter of no bailout for sanctuary cities. Explain, because that's something a lot of people are talking about.
Yeah. Hey, thanks for having me on the program today to talk about this bill. Under the Biden administration with Kamala Harris as the border czar, every state, including the state of Indiana, is now a border state. And, I was proud to co-sponsor this bill and help shepherd it through the House of Representatives. It's authored by my friend Long Island Congressman Nick LaLota. Americans are fed up with the strain this border crisis has put on resources in states like New York, Illinois, Colorado, now Ohio, even Indiana. Sanctuary cities created this by welcoming, turning a light bulb on and saying, come here. And now American taxpayers are being forced to foot the bill. So this legislation says federal tax dollars are not going to be used to offset costs incurred for prioritizing illegal immigrants and over the well-being of U.S. citizens. We're not supporting and reimbursing for paying for hotels, health care, anything that would prioritize the well-being of the illegal immigrant population over our own American citizens. We're seeing it every day around the country. It is getting to a breaking point, Rita, and something's got to give. That's why we're pushing for this legislation.
Congresswoman Erin Houchin, it was amazing last night. We were talking during the debate. And Newt, who was on earlier, it was like when Tim Walz was asked about anything in terms of the impact that illegal immigration has had on every community across the country. I mean, New York alone, it's anywhere from $5 to $10 billion has been the cost so far, and it's just the tip of the iceberg. And he almost seemed like, what are you talking about? Like his reaction during the debate, Tim Walz, who of course is with Kamala Harris, was like, how could you say that about immigrants? It was like they're in la la land. Don't they understand that cities are busting at the seams?
Yes, I thought the same thing as he was talking. Walz seems to forget that Kamala Harris and Joe Biden have been running the country for the last 3.5 years, not Donald Trump. And they have been running the country into the ground. And he just seemed to have no knowledge of that. He was flustered, unprepared, and unsure. Vance was amazing. He was poised and strong and confident. I think that there's some members of the media today that are even having to admit that J.D. Vance outperformed Tim Walz. Really, it was unbelievable to me, the level of uncertainty he had about the current state of affairs, particularly with regard to immigration.
Well,
go ahead, Rudy Washington.
Congresswoman and Judge. Don't immigration fall within the bailiwick of the federal government?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Go ahead, Congresswoman.
Well, you know where I was going to go with this, Judge. Why haven't we litigated this? Now, also, if Donald Trump becomes president, why can't he withhold money to these states?
Yeah, and I think if Donald Trump becomes president, we're going to see a very different country. I think he will start to turn this around. I mean, one of the things that, in our research under the No Bailout for Sanctuary Cities Act that we've discovered is anyone that's here under temporary protected status, anyone that's a parolee, they qualify for certain benefits. And that is a direct result of executive orders signed by Joe Biden that undid all of the executive orders that were protecting American taxpayers and protecting our safety and security by closing the southern border. All of that was undone in the first few days of Joe Biden taking office. They are solely responsible for this crisis. We've heard about this magic bill that is supposed to have originated in the United States Senate that would fix all of this. It was not a good product. It would have codified all of their bad policies, and Republicans just were not going to stand for that. This is, the No Bailout for Sanctuary Cities Act is something that we can do, and we're pushing forward to that with that. But until we elect a different president, these types of things really are spitting in the ocean compared to all of the things that need to happen to get this under control, and it will only happen under the presidency of Donald Trump and J.D. Vance.
Congresswoman Erin Houchin. Judge Weinberg.
Good to talk to you again, Congresswoman. I have to tell you, until the Republicans win the United States Senate, Schumer will blackball this legislation. He will not let it move. It's excellent legislation that you and Congressman Lilloda are pushing for. There should be bipartisan support for this. The fact of the matter is, as a matter of constitutional law, there is no such thing as a sanctuary city. The whole thing is a fraud on the American people, and anybody who's an office holder who tries to enforce a so-called sanctuary city should be removed from office because they're acting illegally contrary to their oath of office. What say you? Judge?
I absolutely agree. And, Chuck Schumer has said he's not going to do anything over in the Senate until after the election. That's a pretty sad state of affairs considering all of the crises that we have going on right now around the country and around the world. That's a dereliction of his responsibility as leader of the Senate, and I do hope that the American people will deliver a Republican Senate this fall. It is critical to us just starting and trying to turn the country around. It will be a new day in America, really, truly, if we are able to elect Donald Trump, J.D. Vance, get a Republican Senate, and hopefully hold our House majority with the help of all those New Yorkers up there that are on the Republican ticket.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Congresswoman, we love having you on. You got to come back again soon. It was so great having you here also when you were visiting in New York, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Great to have you. Keep up the great fight for America.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
Thank you so much. And here are the big headlines of the day.
It's the top news of the day, sponsored by Goya. Here's Rita Cosby.
And here are some of the big headlines. As we talked about here at the top of Katz and Cosby, Mayor Eric Adams may be hit with more federal charges. The mayor was in Manhattan federal court today for a hearing connected to accusations he accepted bribes and illegal campaign contributions. Prosecutors told the judge that it's quite likely the feds will file an expanded version of the indictment that could include more charges against Adams and also could include other defendants. And also President Biden is sending troops to North Carolina to help with Hurricane Helene recovery efforts. He visited the state today and announced he has directed the Department of Defense to deploy 1,000 active duty soldiers to reinforce the North Carolina National Guard. There's been so much devastation in the Southeast after this hurricane. And those are the big headlines of the day. And coming up after this, we're going to talk to John Fund about the fact that on election night, we may not know the winner. He'll explain why.
You're commuting home with Katz and Cosby. Now, here's John Katzimatidis and Rita Cosby on 77 WABC.
And we are back here on Katz and Cosby. Rita Cosby, along with John Katzimatidis. We continue also with Judge Richard Weinberg and also former Deputy New York City Mayor, the one and only Rudy Washington. John Fund, this is amazing. If you sort of look at the landscape, and of course you think about elections in the past, there are many stories out today how election results on November 5th may be delayed across the country because of different sort of state rules, litigation, all this stuff. Explain what could be on the horizon.
Well, it's not just may be delayed, they will be delayed. because remember, 2020 represented a watershed in our elections. Before 2020, the highest percentage of votes that were cast early or by mail was about 22%. It went to 60% in 2020 because of COVID. It'll probably hover between 40 and 50% this time. A big chunk of that, probably 30% of the total vote, will be mail-in votes. Mail-in votes, of course, have problems. The first is they rely on the post office. And we've had two primaries this year, one in Utah and one in Kansas, where 2% of the ballots didn't come back in time because of post office incompetence, or they were lost completely. Many elections are decided by less than 2%, and the National Association of Secretaries of State, which is bipartisan, half Democrat, half Republican, has sent a warning letter to the post office saying our elections may be in jeopardy because we won't know who wins because we may not get all the ballots back. That's just the first problem.
And then what are the second and third? Because first of all, like you said, first getting the ballots, and then in different states, I mean, there's so much early voting this time. It's like an election year versus election day or election week.
Well, early voting is less of a problem than mail-in voting, because early voting means you go to a government office like a county courthouse or a library and you vote there, and that's less of a problem. But the mail-in voting, here's the problem. A lot of states say, well, you can mail in your vote, and as long as it arrives or has a postmark of Election Day, we'll count it. Well, if you mail your ballot on Election Day, it could take 3, 4, 5, 6 days to arrive, and that's a problem. Then, of course, you have the overseas voting. Democrats are going to spend over $10 million getting overseas voters to vote. And here's the problem. In several states, the local secretaries of state have said, if we get an overseas absentee ballot, we're not going to conduct any verification steps on it. So any ballot that comes back to us from overseas, we're just going to count it. And then that's the second and third problem. Then the fourth problem is there are all kinds of problems about when you count the votes, how long it takes to count the votes, and of course then you get to go to court if there are any disputes. And I'll make a bet. If the polls are anywhere accurate that we're going to be as close as 1 or 2% of the popular vote, we will not know the election winner on election night. We won't know it the day after. In fact, remember in 2020, we didn't know until Friday that Joe Biden was going to take the lead. So I'm predicting not election day, but election month.
Wow.
2020, only worse.
Wow. Well, John Funn, thank you so much for joining us. Boy, do we appreciate it. Thank you. Such an important thing.
You can read all about this in my book, Our Broken Elections, which you can get on Amazon.
Awesome. Our Broken Elections, sadly, an appropriate title given the sign of the times. John, thank you so much for joining us. We love having you on, John. Thank you.
Thank you, Rita.
Thank you very much. And joining us now here in studio, we are so thrilled to have her here. We have Congresswoman Lisa McClain from the great state of Michigan. And Congresswoman, first of all, we're delighted to have you here in New York. This is great. And you've got next to you, you have three dapper men in the studio here. John Catsimatidis, of course, and also Judge Richard Weinberg, and also former Deputy New York City Mayor Rudy Washington. Congresswoman, your reaction, first of all, to the debate last night.
Listen, I think J.D. Vance crushed it. I thought he did a great job of contrasting the two campaigns. He talked about, you got one person, Donald Trump, who's actually done the job, and under his leadership with his 4 years in office, peace in the Middle East. We were talking about the Abraham Accords, right? Crime was down. Economy was booming. Our southern border was secure. And he contrasted that with the Biden-Harris administration and Harris's campaign. She talked a lot about, well, when I become president, here's what I'm going to do. Okay, well, you're vice president and you're in the White House right now. What have you done? Nothing. So I thought he did a great job of comparing and contrasting.
And I thought he did a good job also of reminding people. I mean, because she's trying to come out and say, okay, she's the brand new thing out there. And yet, he did a great job saying, look, she's been there 3.5 years plus, reminding everybody. Rudy Washington, you were going to say?
Well, not only that, she was 4 years in the Senate. I mean, so where were the bills? Where were you advocating for anything? Why weren't you making noise in the Senate?
She was making noise. She was equating ICE to KKK.
Right.
That was the noise. I mean, that speaks volumes, too. I mean, of their position. And the other thing we were just talking about, Congresswoman Lisa McClain, is that Walz last night, it seemed like an epiphany to him when J.D. Vance, who was next to him, was saying, look at the damage that's happening to our cities, because of illegal immigration, and brought up, immigrant crime, just the overwhelming on the healthcare system. And boy, we should be taking care of America first. You almost looked at it was like he was talking from Mars, was the way Tim Walz's reaction. Your thought about just how out of touch they are, I think, with the average American.
Well, they've spun so many lies, they can't remember what's true and what's not. That they're in the and I might remind Tim Walz, your city burned. I mean, did you forget about that?
Like, and nobody asked him about that last night, Congresswoman.
Most respectfully, it's not that it just burned. He let it happen. And his wife thought it was the greatest thing since sliced bread.
Yeah, she romanticized. Remember about the smell?
Yeah.
When Walz thought it was the smell of freedom.
Don't leave out your VP raising money.
Yes.
To bail people out of jail.
That's right. Kamala Harris raised money for the Minnesota Freedom Fund that bailed out the rioters. And where were the moderators last night? That was the other thing. I've moderated debates.
They were in the tank.
Yeah, that was crazy. How could you not ask him about, there was not a question about crime. There was a question about guns, but not crime.
Right. I mean, that we see that all the time with these moderators. Look at the Trump debate.
Oh, my goodness. That was an ambush. That wasn't a debate.
100%. And really no different last night is I thought they weren't fact checking. Oh, I forgot we are fact checking. But there again, I give J.D. Vance a lot of credit. He's like, whoa, time out. So if you're going to fact check, let's talk about Springfield. Let me correct the truth with the other half of the truth. So I give him credit for not backing down and doing it in a very respectful manner. I also thought he had command of the stage, right? As vice president, what you say and how you say matters. And I thought he had great command of the stage as opposed to, Walz was shell-shocked a little bit.
How about when he said the line of the night that we haven't talked to, when he said, there were a couple ones, but where he said, I have friends who are school shooters. Right. I thought, that's where I wish J.D. Vance, I wish he had said, wait a minute.
He looked like a man who knew he was over his head. And was not entitled to be in a big
with the
league
eyes
set.
popping out.
But
it was
he did get one thing right. He's like, sometimes I am a knucklehead. He did.
We all can agree with that, Congresswoman.
Do you wish also, Congresswoman, because you're on so many committees, you're a member, of course, of the House Armed Services Committee on Education, Workforce, House Budget Committee, one of the great members of Congress out there. You go, girl. I love that. Your thoughts about what, the missed moments there last night, even on the issues of China. They asked him about the misspeak, but they didn't ask about what about all your visits to China. He claimed it was, for, helping the youth out there with education. Come on.
Again, they tell so many lies, they can't keep it straight. At the end of the day, and it's really sad. I think the people want answers to what are you doing to fix my economy? Right? What are you doing to secure our border? What are you doing to address the issue of crime? What about the housing crisis? No answers on that.
Well, Congresswoman, they even did a follow-up on, where would you put the federal land in that? I'm sitting there like our city's burning. Crime is through the roof. Missiles are flying in the Middle East.
Fentanyl's coming in.
A couple 100,000 Americans have died. You can go on. And we're talking about, where are you going to put the federal land? Where the hell? I couldn't believe it. And they did follow-ups on it.
Yes, and didn't spend any time talking about crime.
And we're on the verge of a world war, a third world war, because of the ineptitude of Biden and Harris.
Yeah, barely a reference just at the beginning about what's going on, and no reference on Russia, Ukraine. I'm sitting there thinking the world's on fire, and they're talking about climate change.
Yep, and that's how out of touch they are. Right? The world, as you said, the world is burning. And it all started with the botched withdrawal from Afghanistan. That's where it all started. Our adversaries took note of that and they smelled weakness and they capitalized on it, right? Weakness breeds aggression, and that's why you see what's happening in Ukraine, what's happening in Israel. Remember, under President Trump, love him or hate him, you can't deny the facts. And, let's not let the facts get in the way of a good story here. But we were talking about the Abraham Accords and peace in the Middle East yesterday when over 200 missiles were shot into Israel. We barely have a mention of that.
Yes, and also, did you hear the answer, Congresswoman, too? When J.D. Vance was very clear, we support Israel, whatever it wants to do. It goes to Waltz at first. He was like, Iran, Israel, he wasn't sure who the enemy was. I mean, that was really scary to me. It was like he was trying to remember what the right line was as opposed to speaking from the heart.
100%. And that's the problem. They prepare for the debates. They don't prepare with answers on how to help the American people on real issues. They try and recall what the canned answer is going to be. And I think the American people, I can share with you in Michigan, I'm cautiously optimistic about Michigan. People know that. They're smart. And you can tell them all day long that, hey, the economy's great. The economy's great. Okay, then why can't I afford my gas? How come I can't afford groceries? Why can't I afford to buy a house? They're not buying what they're selling.
Right. By the way, the port strike wasn't brought up. I mean, that was another thing. Think about what's looming. And John certainly knows. I mean, you look at the impact. It could be $5 billion a day. The supply chain, they spent time on climate change and didn't ask about something. You were a businesswoman for many, many years before Congress. Very accomplished one. What is your reaction to that?
Again, I'll say out of touch. And they don't want to talk about it because they think like they're like an ostrich. If I put my head in the sand and I don't talk about it, then hey, it doesn't exist. But think about what that port strike is going to do. Think about what that port, and especially for me in Michigan, I'm sharing with you heavy manufacturing, heavy auto. You want to talk about a trickle down effect on top of record high inflation? We can't afford that. Right? Not to mention what's happening with the hurricanes. I mean, we need supplies. We need supply chains, and we need those ports open.
Yeah, it's astounding that was not even on. Yeah.
You need Congressman Mike Rogers to be elected to the United States Senate from Michigan. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, we love Mike Rogers. We've had him here.
I do too. He's great. Honestly, he's great, and he's doing a phenomenal job, working hard. And I'll tell you, I am very bullish on Mike Rogers again, and I am because he knows what he's doing, and he speaks the truth, and he can talk about the issues that Michiganders care about. He doesn't need to flip-flop. He doesn't need to change his position. He talks about what he's going to do to improve the state of Michigan.
I want to ask you, as a Michigander, too, I keep thinking about it, and I always tell everybody that, the Biden and Harris have a two-state solution. It's, Michigan and Wisconsin, maybe Pennsylvania, depends, and Minnesota too, right? Minnesota too. But in Michigan, it's like they are so worried to offend certain groups. I would have loved last night, if I was moderating the debate, I would have looked at Tim Walz and I would have said, what do you say to these protesters who are waving pro-Hamas flags? See if he would answer, because he's afraid to alienate. They're playing such politics with what's going on. Your thoughts?
Well, the problem is they're irritating both sides, right? Playing in the middle of the road is the most dangerous place to be. You get run over. You're right. Right. You get run over. And he tries to play the middle of the road, and he gets crushed on both sides. Listen, Israel is our greatest ally that we have in the Middle East. We need to stand with them. It's pretty clear. It's pretty simple.
Right. There's no gray. Congresswoman, stick with us. We're going to go to a quick break. After the break, we have Pulitzer Prize winning columnist Mike Goodwin, and he's going to talk more about the debate and a lot more.
It's a common sense recap of the big stories. It's Katz and Cosby on 77 WABC.
And we are back here on Katz and Cosby. Well, joining us now is the great Pulitzer Prize winning columnist of the New York Post, Michael Goodwin. And Michael, I love your column today. J.D. Vance only boosted Trump. Republicans, while bug-eyed Tim Walz hampered Kamala Harris's chances.
Well, Mike, what are we trying to say in that?
Well, sometimes these headlines get a little long, and they give away the surprise.
Yeah, it was, by the way, the bug-eyed started, I think, 5 seconds in, and it was weird. I mean, and I thought about also sort of like the famous, Nixon debates, where I wondered if people hearing it versus seeing it, if you saw it, you're like, what is going on with this guy?
That's a good point. Visually, that's an important part. I mean, it's on television. That's where most people will see it. And as you mentioned with Nixon, one of the famous stories there is the people who listened to it on the radio thought Nixon won the debate, whereas those who saw it on television thought Kennedy won. And that had a lot to do with Nixon's sweat on his upper lip. It looked like he needed a shave and all of that.
Yeah, but that didn't happen here, Michael.
Yeah, this one was like...
even if you heard it on radio, you know that Walsh lost.
I think when he said that school shooters are good friends of his, I think that he kind of lost a lot of votes.
Yeah, and I mean, there were several things like that where, as I say in the column, he just was speed talking until the time ran out, and his mouth was working faster than his brain. And so there were a lot of non sequiturs. I mean, talking about this whole thing about why did you lie, that not the way it was put, but that you were not in Tiananmen Square, you were not in Hong Kong during the Tiananmen Square uprising. And he spent, almost 3 minutes talking in circles about it. Well, I grew up in a small town in Nebraska where everybody knew everybody, and the kids, we could ride our bikes till the lights came on, and people there know who I am. And what? I mean, and then eventually he gets to, when he's pressed, I was a knucklehead.
And we all agree.
Yeah, we all agree with that part. What's interesting? I wish they had, as in terms of the role of the moderators, I thought one of the strongest moments, and you brought this, we have also, by the way, with us in studio, we have obviously me and John, Judge Weinberg, Rudy Washington, but we also have the great Congresswoman Lisa McClain from Michigan. And the Congresswoman brought up sort of the moment with the fact checking was an interesting moment. And I thought that was very effective for Vance, because he didn't back down when she started a fact check, and then he said, wait, that wasn't the rules here. And then he brought up, and he corrected the record about the CBP app, the Customs and Border Protection app. I thought that was a very effective moment. How do you think the moderators did, and how do you think he did at that moment, Michael?
Well, look, I think the moderators were clearly biased. I think there's no question about that. I thought there were two interesting moments that, I mean, apart from most of the questions they asked Vance were about Trump, but most of the questions they asked Walz were not about Harris per se. They were about him. So it was designed, I think, to put Vance on defense and always to be defending Trump. And Walz was not similarly burdened by Harris. But I thought there was two questions that I lumped together where the moderators said that CBS polls, so their own polling, showed Trump well ahead on the economy, and then separately ahead on immigration. Now, those are the two most important issues for most voters: the economy and the border and immigration. And then crime is sort of a subset of a lot of this immigration stuff, but not the only part. But they just kind of skimmed over that. They didn't tell us what are the details of those polls, because I think that could have shaped much of the debate.
Well, and you know what, also, they did not hit on crime. One of the most astounding comments, and we were live here last night, Michael, when we were talking about it, they brought up guns. And I found a really bizarre comment that he said.
Walsh.
And Walsh said, and I would be playing that all over the place on the Trump JD Vance team. He said, let's not scapegoat mental, health. Let's not use that as an excuse. It's just the guns. Like the guns, somehow hop off the desk, go rob a bank, and then come back and act on their own. It was really a bizarre statement, and it comes after he has talked about mandatory gun buybacks. So has Kamala Harris, and And that was, in a way, I wish Vance at that moment had said, wait a minute, let's talk about your record. What you just said really epitomizes that you're going to do a gun buyback. We have the Congresswoman here. Your thoughts, Congresswoman McClain?
It's amazing to me how they flip-flop. It is just, it's unbelievable. But I agree with you. I wish we would have hit that a lot harder. But again, like you said earlier, it's softball questions for the Democrats, right? It was made to put J.D. Vance on defense and nothing but softball questions for Waltz. And I think the American people see that is you do want to buy back guns. I mean, you talked about it. Right? I thought the other important issue was he didn't answer, was on the abortion question. Right? Is they always want to paint the Republicans into the corner, but I thought J.D. Vance turned that around beautifully.
I agree.
And said, well, you signed a bill that you can have an abortion right up until the moment of the birth. No, I didn't. Really? Yeah, you did. Show me where it doesn't say that. He couldn't answer that. But did you see how they skimmed right over that, and all of a sudden the abortion topic was done and we were on to a different topic?
That was a great point. In fact, I noticed that when Tim Walz answered Michael Goodwin, he said it's distorted. But you're right, he wasn't pressed on, what's the He didn't say it was wrong because J.D. Vance actually read the law. He actually had it memorized. It was a powerful moment and went on the offense on it.
Right.
Also, the last question, and we were talking about this, and I want to bring in, because we have some big breaking news today. The last question I found odd at the debate. It was all about January 6th. Again, obviously to your point, Congresswoman, and Michael's, that it was sort of all customized to kind of put Vance in a corner. So they kept hammering him on January 6th. Lo and behold, just about an hour or so ago, it breaks. What we kind of describe as an October surprise. Judge Chutkan is releasing Jack Smith, with his filing showing that there's some, questionable statements on Trump, trying to smear Trump, if you will.
On the immunity issue, Michael, they're saying that it was private, it was private conduct, not official acts, and it's a total smear job on Trump.
Michael, we just have a few seconds. Your thoughts?
Well, look, I think that, with the moderators asking the questions about January 6th, about climate change, I mean, this is their agenda. This is the Democratic Party's agenda, and it's not the agenda of most Americans. So I think that was a big gap between what the moderators and the media care about and what the country, most Americans care about. Yep. I think that's the bias right there.
Absolutely. Well, everybody check out Michael's great columns as always. Thank you, Michael,
Thanks,
so
Michael.
much.
Thank you.
Congresswoman, how great to have you here in studio.
Great to be
Congresswoman
here.
Lisa McClain from Michigan.
Thanks.
You got to come back soon.
Absolutely.
Thank you. And you guys, what do we all stand for?
Truth, justice, and the American way.
Janine Pirro here for Colonial Metals Group. Colonial Metals Group helps Americans protect their future with the most trusted store of wealth in human history. Physical gold and silver. If you're retiring or retired, go to colonialmetalsgroup.com/Pirro for your free Janine Pirro Colonial Metals Group Retirement Protection Kit, or call 800-965-8004. 800-965-8004 now to receive a free home safe and up to $7,500 in free silver.